Hey guys, what's up? It is Ripe again, back with a mix of Neighbors from Hell and Ask Reddit stories. If you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to join our awesome community, and without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. The first one is titled, Neighbors Set My House on Fire After I Refused to Cut Down My Grass. Me and my neighbor have never seen eye to eye exactly. We had the normal disputes about trash bins and things like that. The one thing this guy had a major problem with was my lawn. At least once a week he would show up on my property just to yell at me and tell me that I needed to cut my lawn because of how ugly and overgrown it was. Now, this guy was what some people might call lawn obsessed, to where he tended to it meticulously and wanted it to be perfect. I, on the other hand, did not really care about my lawn that much and only cut it when it was really getting too long. Being a single father of a young kid makes it hard for me to focus on unimportant things. Still, without fail, once again, he would show up to my house and we would have another conversation and argument about my lawn. Neighbor: I told you to cut your lawn, it looks disgusting. Me: I told you before to leave me alone about my damn lawn. It's my property and I can cut it how I like and when I like. Neighbor: you are making the whole neighborhood look bad. Just let me come over and cut the grass myself the right way. And by the way, Ripe Stars, that's probably an offer from the neighbor I would not have turned down. Me: if you come anywhere near my property with a mower, I will have you arrested for trespassing. Leave me and my property alone. Neighbor: we will see about that. I will be back. Cut your grass. Then he would usually leave as the other neighbors came to see and watch the screaming match. One day though, things were a little bit different and he got so worked up after I told him that I might just never cut my grass again if he didn't stop, that he ended up slapping me across the face. I went right into my house and called the police. I did not want to have him arrested, just scare him enough to maybe leave me alone finally. The police arrived and I explained the situation to them. When they asked if I wanted to press charges again against the neighbor, I told them no. The officer went and spoke to the neighbor anyway to warn him, and I don't really know what went on with their conversation. I honestly thought that maybe that would be enough to calm him down and keep him away, but it turns out that me calling the cops had gotten him extremely angry, and after they left he was going to try and teach me a lesson. He came back later and yelled at me again about calling the cops over nothing and telling me that with his past record he would probably end up going back to jail. I had no idea that the neighbor was in jail before, and later I found out that he had been arrested for assault before. The final thing he said to me before going back to his house was that if I ever called the cops on him again, that he would kill me. I'm not gonna lie, that kind of scared me. At that point I did not know what his past record had been for, and for all I knew, he had killed before. Still, I wanted to just get on with my life and chose to ignore it instead of calling the cops back immediately and telling them what he had threatened me with. Looking back, I was kind of the idiot in the situation for not doing that and instead just waiting and pretending like everything would be fine now. So I went back into my house and tried to just move on with the rest of my day like nothing had happened per usual with our fights. I was sitting in the living room playing with my daughter when a brick smashed through the window and ended up hitting me in the side. Glass shattered everywhere and I put my body over my daughter to try and keep any glass from landing on her. That is when I noticed the strange smell and saw that the brick and window were covered in gasoline. I was not quick enough to put two and two together, and a minute later my house was on fire and I don't remember much of anything besides hightailing it outside with my daughter in my arms. I could see the fire and I did not have my phone, so I ran across the street and asked them to call 911. I did notice, however, neighbor hightailing it out of there with his car. That plus another neighbor's witness had it be clear as day that neighbor tried to set my house on fire with me and my daughter in it as some kind of revenge for me calling the cops on him. By the time the fire was put out, the inside of my house was basically ruined. It would take months to fix the damages and more money than I had. Luckily, my mother lived fairly close by and allowed me and daughter to stay there for as long as we needed. As for neighbor, he had not returned home and was now officially on the run. It took only about a day before neighbor apparently gave up and turned himself in to the police. He knew there was no way he was going to get away with it, so he actually pled guilty on all charges. In exchange, they took away his charge for attempted murder and instead only charged him with arson, aggravated assault and death threats that he tried to carry out on. Plus a bunch of minor charges like damage to public utilities that didn't seem as important to the judge. That plus his record basically assured that he would be getting sent back to jail and I would not have to worry about him anymore. As far as the damages to my house went, he ended up having to pay about $70,000, of which I only saw about half, to fix my house. My insurance was covering most of the actual home repairs though, so his money ended up being used to replace furniture and other things that my insurance did not. I was mostly glad that my daughter seemed to be too young to really understand what happened, and as soon as she got to my mother's house started playing again like nothing had happened. I cannot wait to put all of this behind me though. I did not tell you the most ironic part of all of this story yet though. So, this neighbor that had been arrested for assault and been in jail before, he was actually considered one of the peacekeepers of the neighborhood, and with everyone else he was calm and pleasant, wanting to help them solve their problems and everyone to get along. It was like night and day compared to how he dealt with me, and to this day I have no idea why he chose me to start constant fights with, while with everyone else he appeared to be the nicest guy ever. Some things like that will just remain a mystery, I guess. Lawyers of Reddit, what is the detail that your client failed to bring up to you that completely lost you the case? So the first comment goes like this. I am actually a lawyer, but I was only watching this trial, not participating. So the case was that woman A had hit woman B in the head with a heavy beer pint at a bar, and woman B got pretty serious injuries. The defense claimed that woman A had not hit anyone with the pint, but instead had just thrown the pint into a random direction and it happened to hit B in the head, and thus it was an accident and not a battery. Well, the prosecution had a CCTV tape from the bar and it was shown at the trial. And the tape clearly showed in HD as A walked behind B and smashed the pint to her head so hard that the pint shattered on impact. I looked at the defense lawyer and his jaw literally almost hit the table. The prosecutor also noticed this and asked something along, "Thrown, eh?" And the defense lawyer said that due to technical difficulties he could not get the CCTV tape open on his computer when he was reviewing the evidence. Woman A was found guilty, so yeah, I was completely dumbfounded. And I gotta say guys, in order to shatter a pint by throwing it at someone, you need to have some serious strength. The pints people usually use in Germany are really quite tough, so you definitely have to really hate the person you are hitting it with. And the next one goes like this. I am a court-appointed attorney for qualifying individuals in family matters. Termination of parental rights case have been fighting to argue that parents are stable, working lawfully, has a suitable apartment, does not need psychotropic meds anymore, ready to be a parent, etc. After a few months of negotiating with all the parties and Department of Children, court services, etc., we have a pre-trial to try and convince the guardians. I meet with my client before the hearing to see if anything changed. Nope, all good, let's get my kids. Great, that's not happening today, but let's try. We get going in court. My client, who is super hot-headed and quick to anger, gets riled up and goes off on the guardians. Screaming in open court, it does not end there, but reveals that 1. No longer is working, 2. No longer in apartment, and 3. Doesn't want to have a relationship with guardians despite her kids loving them. Number 4 won't send her kids pictures of the toys they miss and cannot have. Number 5 plans on moving out of state. And number 6 thinks they can live as a family off of state aid when she gets them back. And is 4 months pregnant. All in the matter of 15 seconds. I was too shocked to even react. Speechless. Not the image of stability and parental fitness I've been trying to paint since last July. Added to clarify, the client was working really hard to get everything right and legitimately had everything going for her prior to this hearing. I was not making false representations or trying to get a monster reinstated. This was a true bombshell, as I did my due diligence to make sure things were on the up and statutory requirements were met. Things fell apart very fast apparently. This was a very atypical situation. Parents typically do a really good job working hard to meet their requirements. And the next one, not my client, but the son of the opposing party, and presumably the party himself, lied about being blind to make himself seem more sympathetic as a witness. We didn't know either until he took the witness box. Their counsel asked him to take the oath, and he picked the card up and read it. That was the cherry on top of a series of ridiculous events. The judge dismissed the whole thing in our client's favor shortly after. I was a trainee at the time, but my boss, who was in her late 60s then, said it was the most ridiculous case she had ever handled. And the next one, I was involved in a hit-and-run car accident. My leg was pretty mangled, however, the driver of the car was caught. Turns out he was a rich kid who was driving his mom's convertible Porsche. Denied all knowledge of hitting me, etc. At the trial, the prosecutor asked him how long he had been driving, to which he answered,
"Do you mean how long I've been driving legally or illegally?"
The judge then went nuts, asking why and when he had been driving illegally. His defense team sat down in their chairs and shook their heads. Needless to say, he lost the case. Interestingly, he died a year later by drowning. He had hired a speedboat on holiday, flipped it over and drowned. Turns out he was drunk at the time. Karma can be a bitch. And the next one, not a lawyer. My parents had a long, messy divorce that took 2.5 years in court. My dad claimed that my mother was trying to take 100% of everything based on a settlement offer she sent him. He failed to mention to his lawyers that her initial offer, also sent to his previous lawyers, was a 60-40 split, and she only sent that 100% one in response to an equally unreasonable offer from him. As soon as she could prove the initial offer was reasonable, the judge just basically ruled on everything according to that first offer. His lawyers were so angry because they built their entire case around the idea that she was the unreasonable one. I think it was something to do with arguing that she was not sending genuine settlement offers. I'm not sure why. His goal was not to win, it was to prolong the battle, but the original offer exposed him in the lie in front of the judge, which made the rest of the process go very quickly. And the next one, not me, but my mentor. This is the reason you never ask questions that you don't already know the answer to in court. During the trial with the judge on a divorce matter, the wife brought up that he had abused her during the course of their marriage. The client whispers to my mentor that this is absolutely not true. On the stand during his portion of testimony, my mentor asks, "At any point in the marriage, did you lay your hands on your wife?"
"One time we were having an argument and I held her down on the couch until she stopped arguing with me."
What? My mentor said it was like she could see it happening in slow motion and all the alarm bells were going off in her head because he had never mentioned this, and apparently to him this was not abuse. The judge gave the wife a lot more money as a result, and the husband was baffled. My mentor was fuming. ETA, husband admitted this was the only time he had laid hands on his wife. My mentor was more peeved because she had thought the case was in the bag, since the wife had abandoned the kids with the husband to run off with her lover down in Florida and literally only came back to the state to get the divorce done. Husband had been noted as being a great dad to the kids and a good figure in the community, hence why she was so damn shocked at his answer. And the next one, this one ended my marriage. Well, it was the start of the end of marriage. My husband lost his job in the title/mortgage business, applied for unemployment, got denied, and I decided to help him with his appeal hearing. I asked him multiple times before the hearing, "Is there anything you did that caused them to fire you?" He says no, absolutely not, they fired him out of nowhere. Hearing day comes, he testifies under oath that he did nothing wrong, was a good employee, no issues. Upon cross-examination, the other attorney pulls out documents from one of his real estate closings, documents he forged and backdated, had to admit he perjured himself. Needless to say, he did not get unemployment and he did not sleep at home that night. And the next one is an answer to the one previously. Damn, that's rough. It is one thing to lie to a stranger, but to your spouse when they are supporting you? A friend of mine was married to some kind of technician. He worked, among other things, installing and repairing elevators. One day one of the customers sues him for destroying an elevator and the husband denies having anything to do. My friend is enraged and, together with the husband's lawyer, goes over all the evidence and the documents to prepare a rock-solid defense. And suddenly, my friend realizes that a lot of things don't add up. She asks her husband, "Please, be honest with me, did you do it?" Several times, which always causes the husband to explode at her and accuse her of being a bad wife. And then, a couple days before the beginning of the trial, he comes to her hanging his head low and admits that it was him. The customer ended the maintenance contract, and in retaliation, this guy showed up with a hammer outside business hours and trashed the elevator. My friend was livid. If they didn't have children, she would have divorced him. And the next one goes like this. Not a lawyer, but a woman I know received several hefty speeding fines. In my country, you can see a magistrate to have the fines reduced if you plead poverty. She heard about this and decided to give it a shot. She went to court and told the magistrate a sob story about not having enough money. The magistrate heard her out and then he asked her, "Madam, what type of car do you drive?" She replied in a tiny voice,
"A Porsche."
Added, many have raised the fair point that a Porsche does not necessarily cost that much and it is not indicative of her financial status, so I will add that it was not a beat up or old model at the time. She could have paid the fines without breaking the bank. She was just pushing her luck. She's a wealthy woman who just didn't want to pay her fines and the magistrate was not having any of it. And the next one goes like this. Guy in prison hired me to request a modification of his sentence because he was doing very well, completing a lot of optional programs, no rule violations, etc. He had his family come in and pay and everything to get started. I asked the family and the client if he had requested modification before, because the law said that for his conviction he could only request modification twice for any one sentence, regardless of if they were granted or denied. Swore up and down he had never filed before. You can see where this is going. After spending a few hours going over records and preparing documents, a copy of the CCS, the case record basically, finally arrived. He had personally filed for modification 6 times since he was sentenced with handwritten pleadings that were all denied. So the one he hired me for was a waste of time and would never be considered at all. And the next one goes like this. Friend of mine is a defense attorney. He was representing a guy with a lengthy record for assault. Basically, this guy took an AC unit and threw it at his girlfriend. My buddy tells me he was able to get a plea deal for 1 year probation and no jail time. The judge is all ready to accept the deal when he asks the defendant if he had anything he would like to say. The defendant responds,
"Yeah, I don't know why they are charging me with assault. I never touched her. I just threw an AC at her. This is BS."
The judge rescinded the plea deal because of the defendant's attitude/lack of remorse and went to trial and got a year in jail. Next one, not a lawyer, but going to law school. I worked for a defense attorney who did a lot of federal work. One of our cases was with this guy charged with sex trafficking of minors. We met him at the prison to interview him and he swore up and down he had nothing to do with this and that he did not even know the girls. A month or so later, heaps of evidence from the US Attorney's Office comes in and it is pages of Snapchat messages and texts between him and these girls. Video confessions from every co-defendant and victim saying our guy was the ringleader, proof of him checking in/out of different motel rooms, etc. We showed him the evidence and he claimed his co-defendants were conspiring against him. He continued to deny everything and wanted to go to trial, but we repeatedly told him that would not be wise because of all the evidence against him. He ended up requesting a new attorney to be appointed, claiming that we were ineffective. To this day, my old boss and I reminisce about how difficult this client was when we catch up on the phone. Next one, I was actually on a jury. Guy was suing a business, said he got injured, could not work for 3 years. Defense counsel, "Sir, isn't it true that you spent 18 of those months in prison for armed robbery?" Edit for more info, the guy was saying he was shopping at a major grocery store chain and slipped in some water on the ground in front of a freezer. The guy has cell phone video with his wife made of him in the water, and we could hear her saying that the water was not showing up on video and to splash it with his hand so it would look better in the video. It also came out that he'd had 3 prior convictions for crimes of dishonesty, that may not be the exact term, but something similar, for things like shoplifting and other petty crimes. Second edit for more info while I am on my lunch break, the guy was representing himself pro se. Or pro se, I'm not sure. Defense counsel asked him if his inability to work could be from the 2 previous knee injuries he'd had. When asked how they knew about those injuries, he was told his previous lawyer had given the defense his medical records upon request. The guy wanted to enter his MRIs as evidence but had no one there as an expert witness to explain to the jury what they showed. He wanted to show us what the results were. Next one, my father is a judge. I remember him talking about a case where a woman was suing for severe back injury that she said was preventing her from working and taking care of her kids and so on. In the middle of the trial, a pen rolled off the table and she is bending over trying to reach it from her chair, but the pen was too far away, so she stands up and bends over and picks it up and goes back to her seat as if nothing is out of the ordinary. My dad is just looking at her and she snaps at my dad and goes,
"What are you staring at?"
My dad asked her if she was okay and her response was that she was fine. Her attorney leaned over and said something to her and she then loudly started complaining about her back and how much her back hurt, but no one believed her. Next one, I was approached by this attorney to work for him for free to go after smugglers. This guy had been arrested for dumping goods onto American markets that violated trade agreements. In his arrest, a bunch of goods were left in warehouses to rot and their owners, his clients, were never paid. This attorney showed me that this smuggler had assets and that he had gone to the criminal trial and gotten the judge to set aside $2 million of the criminal penalties to settle his client's debt. He had receipts, invoices, all of the paperwork. He just needed associates to help him take the case to trial. He wanted me to work for free, but he would pay me on contingency once he obtained the verdict. He had 2 other attorneys working for him with the same deal. I worked on the case for a short while, but luckily moved on to other things. The other 2 attorneys worked on that case for over 2 years. At one point they negotiated a $1.5 million settlement of all claims. The attorney in charge rejected the offer because he was convinced he could get twice as much at trial. In the end, the case settled for $200,000 because none of the clients would enter the United States to testify for fear of being arrested. The 2 associates got $8 apiece for 2 years of work. And the next one, a postcard. While I was in law school, I worked in a state AG office, Administrative Appeals Division. The guy was appealing a huge tax bill for unpaid tax on his dairy farm's milk production. His entire defense and claimed basis for appeal was that he had 0 notice of the requirements to report production, sale and proceeds. In initial disclosures, pile of discovery, was a postcard from the state tax office from when he initially registered to obtain a state tax number. Very smart AAG laid low, sprung it on the guy after he has cemented his position 50 ways to Sunday. Exploded his whole theory, resulting in big judgment. The moral of the story, read your own discovery responses and document production before building your entire theory of the case. One piece of paper can kill your client's position. This lesson has saved my bacon in 27 years of practice for sure. When I was a law student, I interned for a judge. One of the cases we were observing was an illegal lockout case where this owner of a franchise location for an international cafe company claimed the landlord/owner of the right to issue franchises in the US happened to be the same guy, just one day locked him, franchise owner, out. The landlord had claimed the franchise owner was selling unapproved merchandise with the company's logo on it. For 2 days, all we were hearing is about these cups the plaintiff allegedly made. Argument was that counterfeit merch violated terms of franchise and lease, which meant terminating both. Finally, the landlord is on the stand. The defense attorney pulls out a shopping bag as he's about to introduce evidence. Me and the other interns are so excited. For 2 days we've been hearing about these effing cups, and the landlord suddenly cannot remember where he got the cups from. In response to one question, he says he got them at the cafe, in another he says the corporate office gave it to him. Since he raised doubt about the source of the cups, the judge would not let him in and we never got to see them. The defense attorney had to sadly put the bag away back into his briefcase. So yeah, lesson learned, prepare your witnesses, especially when you are trying to introduce critical evidence. And the next one, credit card theft/fraud case. When I was a young lawyer back in the late 80s, I was trying this guy on a CC case and the witness was the department store clerk. Before video surveillance, the state relied heavily on witness identification. As she described the customer that was purchasing the very unique clothing her store sold, I asked her how could she be so sure it was my client. She looked at my client, who was wearing the most obnoxiously yellow shirt imaginable, and said,
"Because not only does he completely match the description I just gave you, but he's wearing the exact same shirt I sold him."
The jury convicted him and I learned that day to better prepare my clients for trial. Next one, not mine, but went to court over a ticket. Lady was in front of me for DUI and hit and run. The judge assigns a lawyer for her since she was so shook she quit her job. The judge asks the prosecuting attorney for details on the case and she legit says,
"You mean that car I hit while I was intoxicated?"
The judge stops and takes his glasses off and says, "Everything is recorded in this courtroom. I told you not to talk to anyone about your case except the attorney that I assigned for you." You could tell he was ready to walk out of the room with the level of stupidity this lady showed. And then another person said, "Sounds like my mom. She's going through a lawsuit with her HOA and in her head she just thinks that she can just explain everything away and everyone will be on her side. She's met with her lawyer twice already and he keeps telling her to stick to facts only and her response is always,
"Well, I have to explain this."
Or,
"But this is what I think and feel."
If she ever gets arrested, she will never remain silent. I had to go to court for child support and she wrote a 3-page letter to the judge about why my ex was garbage and fully expected me to get up in court and read it. I had a prosecutor representing the enforcement agency that did all the talking. And the next one goes like this. I was not a lawyer in this role but was a law clerk. This was a typical divorce case. This particular jury trial was about splitting assets and who would get what. It was a long drawn-out case that took about 5 days. Right before the closing arguments, the attorneys wanted to talk to the judge. It seems as though a couple of days prior, the couple decided to get back together and instead of telling the judge and their lawyers, they just kept it a secret. We heard 4 days of evidence, arguments, brought in experts such as land assessors, financial planning people and the like, and they were back together. One of the attorneys asked to be dismissed from the case immediately and walked out the courtroom. The judge had to dismiss the jury and the couple was adamant that they didn't think that them getting back together was a detail any of their attorneys needed to know. Added, yes, in some states there are jury trials for divorces, however, this particular case was not for the divorce but for a cause of action stemming from the divorce, marital property. It was a jury trial. And ripe stars, with this we have reached the end of the video. However, if you still cannot get enough of my content, then I would highly suggest to check out my endless binge watch playlist, which will soon show up in the left corner of the screen. In addition, I would really appreciate it if you could not only subscribe to the channel but also turn on the bell notifications, which you can do by clicking on the little bell icon right next to the subscribe button. This will help my channel tremendously and this will make sure that you don't miss any of my videos. Furthermore, if you want to see additional ripe content that I don't post on YouTube, then I would suggest to head on over to patreon.com/ripeyoutube for more than 50 exclusive videos that you will not see anywhere else. Thank you so much for your amazing daily support and I hope to see you again tomorrow.